A brand new era. That was the way many felt about Generation 5. After all, there are many things about these games that make it feel like a completely refreshing experience. A region located far away from every other one, resulting in them also leaving behind every Pokemon from before. But not only that, it introduced what is to this day the largest batch of new Pokemon, being an astounding 156. A number that shares a suspicious similarity to the 151 released back in Red and Blue, with many having similar roles to those in the Kanto games. However, Gen 5 also brought along another less appreciated aspect of the Gen 1 Pokedex, a sizable group of underwhelming and pretty forgettable duds. Since Gen 5 is my personal favorite generation, I think it's finally time that I take a look at its most mediocre Pokemon and make them more desirable for a playthrough. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It helps out the channel and lets me know that you want to see more of these bad Pokemon videos. Now, let's fix Gen 5's most forgotten Pokemon. To start things off, let's look at a Pokemon that I'm sure some of you have encountered in your Gen 5 playthroughs, but most likely never considered using it on a team. Actually, there are probably a lot of you who just forgot about it, that being Maractus, aka Cacturn Jr. It's got everything that you need in an underwhelming Pokemon, a bland typing, an out-of-the-way location, and an average stat distribution. Actually, now that I think about it, it's basically a grass-type Seviper in terms of its stats, and we all know just how fantastic Seviper is. There's little reason to use Maractus over other Gen 5 pure grass types. I think Maractus is really cute, so here's what I do to make it a little more appealing. Firstly, despite its stats not really standing out all that much, I think they're fine for a mid-game grass type. I think just increasing its defenses and speed by 10 would be a good buff. My big issue with Maractus though is just that it's so bland. More specifically, its move pool is bland. Like, they really made a cactus Pokemon based on maracas and barely gave it anything thematic? We have a lot to work with here. I think it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to give it a few water-type moves by level ups such as Water Gun early on and Hydro Pump much later. This would give it a way of dealing with fire types and kinda makes sense given that cactuses contain high volumes of water, which Maractus can probably expel at will. More moves based on its design that I'd give are the 2 Spikes moves, Leech Seed, Twin Needle, and maybe Counter, since I'd imagine that punching a cactus would hurt. Next, to lean into its musical design, it could also get moves such as Encore and Teeter Dance to mess with opponents, Heal Bell for status healing, Quiver Dance to boost, which it surprisingly has never been able to learn, and lastly, Stored Power. This seems like a weird choice since it's a Psychic type move, and Maractus does not look like it has psychic powers. However, seeing as cactuses are succulent plants that store water in their stems, I think from a design standpoint it kinda makes sense. Finally, I think Maractus' 2 abilities fit both from a thematic and gameplay perspective. I was originally thinking of giving it Simple as a reference to its not super unique design, but that would probably be too broken with Acupressure. Still though, I think what Maractus really needed was a move pool enhancement, and these subtle additions should help it stand out now and give the little cactus some love that it desperately wants. Good old Stunfisk, the Dunsparce of Unova. I mean, I guess it does have a cool ground electric typing and also cool Galarian form, but in its debut generation, I seriously doubt anyone is using this fish that's flatter than my personality on a team. If you want one in black and white, you're gonna have to wait until the 7th gym. If you want it in the sequels, you have to wait until after beating the champion to get it. I mean, even Dunsparce got an evolution, so I feel like poor Stunfisk deserves some love too. Stunfisk's stat distribution is clearly geared towards being a defensive sponge. While this isn't really optimal for a single player playthrough, I don't have a problem with it. I'd probably just swap its physical and special attack stats, and then give it 10 more physical defense. As for its level up learn set, I would replace Thundershock and Thunderbolt with Spark and Wild Charge since I'm opting to make it a physical attacker. For ground type stab, it could get Bulldoze early on to cover its low speed, and then Earthquake later on. Outside of stab though, there are a couple of moves that it could get that are related to its design. Crunch and Sucker Punch would give it some nice coverage and fit into its behavior of waiting for prey to come to it, while Curse and Pain Split should be part of its level of learn set instead of being egg moves to support its high HP and defenses. It could also get Iron Head to reference the fact that its entire body is apparently hard enough to resist even a sumo wrestler. Finally, Stunfisk's 3 abilities are Static, Limber, and Sandveil. Static synergizes well with Stunfisk's defensive stat spread, but Limber is completely useless for an electric type. I would replace it with Levitate since it's been shown to be able to fly in the anime. Yeah, this does sort of remove Electros's niche, but it would still be the only Pokemon without a weakness. Plus, Stunfisk is pretty forgettable as is, so I don't think it would hurt to tag on an ability that makes it a bit more noteworthy as an electric type. Between generations 2 and 6, there was one type that stood above the rest in terms of its unrivaled ferocity and power, the Dragon type. Having 4 common resistances, 2 rare weaknesses, and only being resisted by Steel types, Dragon types were the undisputed powerhouses of the Pokemon world. Each new generation saw even stronger dragons being introduced, with every single one of them displaying some level of terror or mystique. But then, in Gen 5, there was Druddigon. Outclassed in almost every single way. Poor design, unimpressive stats compared to other dragons, and it's only found towards the end of the game. I feel like Druddigon has a lot of unused potential, so I'm gonna try to give it that. Druddigon's dex entries state that its skin is tougher than rock, which is kind of reflected in its stats, but base 90 for defense is still kinda low in my opinion. I feel like raising its physical defense by 20 would do it more justice. Now I actually think one of Druddigon's strong points is its move pool. Especially in Black and White 2, it's got a ton of coverage options to make its base 120 attack pretty scary. But for those who want to use it defensively, adding Spikes and Stealth Rock makes sense design-wise and give it some good utility. But if you want to use it as an all-out attacker, it could get Head Smash, Iron Head, and Zen Headbutt to showcase its rock-solid head. Lastly, Druddigon's 2 main abilities are great. Rough Skin lets it punish incoming physical attacks, and Sheer Force makes moves with secondary effects deal enormous damage. However, I don't really find its hidden ability, Mold Breaker, to be all that appealing. I thought about it for a bit and decided that having Solid Rock instead would give it a second defensive ability that would give Druddigon the unique advantage of taking less damage from its weaknesses. Sure, it'll probably still be disliked due to its design and slowness, but for the few who don't judge it by its cover, they'll be surprised at its immense utility. And now, we have the last 2 Pokemon of this video, possibly the 2 most forgotten Pokemon out of the 156. They both share some common traits: late game, out of the way, and completely outclassed by their peers who can be obtained much earlier. The first of the 2 is the less bad one, Beheeyem. It really hurts because I love its design. It's an alien with the power to manipulate opponents' thoughts at will. Sadly, it won't be controlling much with its 40 speed and 75 defense. You want to hit hard? Use Reuniclus. You want to take hits? Use Musharna. And even if you're looking for some sort of middle ground, Gothitelle just does it so much better. There's really no reason to use it. I want Beheeyem to stand out and be a viable choice for a playthrough, so let's do that. Almost every single dex entry paints Beheeyem in a bad light, mentioning its ability to control the minds of others and tendency to abduct Dubwool living in farms. And its shady overcoat design represents this perfectly. This might be a controversial choice, but I'd slap on the dark typing. This will give it a 4x bug weakness instead of just a 2x one, but you're probably already not keeping Beheeyem in against a bug type, so I feel like the defensive benefits of an extra dark type outweigh the cons. This would also make it the only psychic dark type at that point, further alienating it from the psychic type crowd. As for stats, I was a bit stumped. Obviously, it's supposed to be a hard-hitting, slow special attacker, but that's kinda just what Reuniclus does, but worse. Well, surely mind control requires a ton of brain power, right? So I think it would be fun to raise its special attack by 20, and now it's got the trait of being the hardest-hitting non-legendary psychic type. Yes, its 40 speed will still make it vulnerable, but I feel like that drawback is a little more justifiable now. As for its moveset, I think Beheeyem already has a solid move pool, but I want to give it some moves for its new dual dark typing and its design. For new dark type moves, I'd give it Nasty Plot and Night Daze. I know that Night Daze is Zoroark's signature move in Gen 5, but blinding your opponent with Dark Wave? There's no way that doesn't also fit for Beheeyem. I would also give it Cosmic Power, Will-O-Wisp, Confuse Ray, Hex, and Flash Cannon to illustrate its alien characteristics. Lastly, while Analytic is great and Synchronize is okay, Telepathy is kinda useless. Now, this is gonna be a pretty broken suggestion, but I feel like Shadow Tag would fit Beheeyem a lot better than it does on Gothitelle. I mean, it could use its mind-controlling powers to stop the enemy from fleeing. I gotta say, Beheeyem is probably my favorite design out of all of the Gen 5 psychic types. It's just a shame that it had so many things done wrong with it to make it so forgettable. But if you thought Beheeyem was extremely forgettable, at least it could be saved. This final Pokemon is one very similar to Magcargo. I'm not sure if there's much that could be reasonably done to make it worth your time at all. All of the Pokemon I've talked about so far in this video have some incentive to be used in a playthrough, even if they're a bit out of the way. Maractus will be your strongest grass type at that point. Stunfisk has a unique typing. Druddigon is the easiest dragon type to get. Beheeyem, looks cool. But Heatmore, why do you exist? You can't find it until the very end of the game, and even then, it's not a common encounter, so there's a good chance you'll never see one in your playthrough. And even if you do decide to catch one, you'll be greeted with one of the most mediocre fire types of all time. A late game, completely outclassed, forgettably designed Pokemon? I'm not sure how it can be fixed. If you look at its base stat total, 484 doesn't seem too bad, but then you look at its distribution. Wow, it's almost like I've seen this exact same distribution somewhere else. Look, being a mixed attacker is cool and all, but it's useless if you're too frail to take a hit and too slow to move first. I decided to increase its physical and special attack by 5 each, its defenses by 10, and its HP by 10. Yeah, believe it or not, no speed buff. I just don't think that Heatmore would be a very fast-acting Pokemon, so more speed wouldn't really make sense. As for level-up moves, I wanted to take advantage of what is perhaps Heatmore's only cool trait, its ability to use its fire like a tongue. And what better way to help it out than with Power Whip? It's stronger than Giga Drain, covers all 3 of its weaknesses, and sorta makes sense. Bulldoze and Earthquake would also fit in well with the size of Anteaters, as well as Heatmore's behavior of hunting for ants. I would also tack on Rock Slide as a reference to Unova's Victory Road being a steep cliff, probably prone to a lot of rock slides. Scald could be another coverage option based off of its tail that emits steam that would make Heatmore stand out more. And lastly, Flame Charge to patch up its speed, and also because how can a fire type not learn a basic fire type move like Flame Charge? Lastly, for its abilities, I think Flash Fire is fine, but Gluttony is pretty useless. One of Heatmore's biggest problems is that it doesn't have a single super impressive stat, so I decided to give a new ability to work around this. Why not have a little fun and replace Gluttony with Defiant? After all, Heatmore's entire existence is centered around hunting Durant, or, in other words, defying ants. Yeah, you can boo me for that one. But I do think that this change, along with all of the other ones, will make these currently forgotten Pokemon a bit more sought after in a playthrough. Gen 5 is my personal favorite generation, and I think a lot of the Pokemon introduced are awesome. But sadly, there are these few who never got to spend a second in the spotlight. It's unfortunate. I have a sweet spot for less memorable Pokemon, and I hope that in time, more people will lay their eyes on them. Because they all deserve some attention. But I guess for now, they'll just be sitting at the bottom of the never-ending list of Pokemon. A list that will shove them even further down as it endlessly grows.